But where things seem to be more favourable is on Grace itself, the CPU part.
Oh, yeah.
And this is where I got some feedback from someone I can't name because it was pretty confidential, but these trials have been going on looking at different ARM-based CPUs against Intel's Xeon family, the ones that have been used very much in virtual RAN until now, and kind of assessing them against that for doing the radio access network. And the feedback after these trials that they'd done was that Nvidia, with its Grace ARM-based CPU, was like right up there at the top.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. We're back in the studio proper this time, as opposed to last week where we did a remote one, but me and Ian sat in the studio next to each other, which I thought was very cute.
We won't want to make a habit of it though.
No.
People would talk.
People will. So now we're back in the studio properly because Pierre stopped dicking about abroad.
Hey, so did you?
Yeah, hopefully, and we're coming up to a season where it's going to be quite fragmented. Like in a few weeks, I'm going off around France. Teach them a bit of manners.
Whereabouts?
We're going to drive, get the Channel Tunnel over. First drive is to a house in the Loire area.
Oh, yeah, you told me.
And the second one is to a house in the Dordogne area, actually in Bergerac, I think. That's the Dordogne.
I wonder what you'll be drinking there.
Do you know what I mean? So yes, I expect it. I mean, Dordogne is also great for other really naughty grub like foie gras and that sort of thing. Yes. So then I'll be off then, and then we haven't coordinated our holidays at all. Then Ian's fucking off for a bit, and then you're... So anyway, I'll tell you closer to the time, but expect sporadic pods over the summer, and I'm sure you're not surprised to hear it.
I think we're both away at the same time.
Yeah, you two are both away. It was certainly...
So you'll have to do a pod on your own. Holding a smartphone up.
I think certainly the latter half of August is definitely a write-off.
You could walk around supermarkets with it sort of held up like people do, talking about telecoms.
Like an influencer.
Yeah, exactly. Be a telecom influencer.
No. So we better crack on because we've only got just over an hour. We're actually getting dangerously good at doing shorter podcasts. I'm worried that we're setting a precedent. We need to get a good solid 2-hour job in.
Was the last one short then?
Yeah, the remote ones tend to be shorter anyway. But we also had time constraints. They were both about an hour and a half or something.
It's about quality, not quantity.
Yeah,
I know. It's just that we just like to witter on. So I'm just going to get straight into it and keep the bullshit to a minimum, unless you've got anything really exciting you've done in the last week to tell the class.
Not that I've done.
No.
Exciting stuff coming up. But...
I think one thing I will say, like last week we announced that a mystery admirer had sent us a crate of Beavertown beers, and it was a full spectrum from Lupoloid at the 6.7% end to even alcohol-free, which I'll choose to overlook.
Well, I did have one of those.
You just had one, now because you're thirsty. Was it all right?
Yeah, it's good.
All right, did it taste like beer?
The alcohol-free beers nowadays are much better than they used to be 20 or 30 years ago.
Yes.
Do you remember the days of Caliber?
Yeah, well, that sort of thing.
That was horrible. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I largely don't see the point of alcohol-free beer, which probably says something about my relationship with alcohol. But there we go.
Yeah.
So I thought we'd have a strategy, because normally we'd stick with stuff like the neck oils are our stock one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sort of session beer around 4.5%. You know where you stand with that. You can drink almost limitless amounts of neck oil, as we often do after the pod.
Didn't feel too good last week, to be honest.
No, that went on a bit longer than either of us thought it would.
Yeah.
Well, you're the worst one. I'm like, right, I've got to go. And you were like one more. And you're already ordering at the bar before I've even had a chance to object. So you're the one who leads us astray. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it wasn't my fault.
So I thought we'd go for a spectrum. As we've got to drink the ones that we wouldn't normally drink, I thought we'd start with the balls out one, the Lupoloid, which is 6.7%, because that's what we're on now. Then we're going to move to neck oil, and then we're going to finish off on one that's only 2.8%. And it'd be interesting to see if that's any good, because that they should start serving that in pubs for people like us who like just sit there and talk shit for hours on end.
I've had it before. Yeah. They also do a 2.5 one.
Right.
And it's just less sweet. It's pretty good.
Well, we'll find out. We'll probably do that one last, by which stage, after this Lupoloid, we'll be incapable of making any rational decisions about anything.
Maybe like 2 or 3.
That's drinkable when it's cold, isn't it, Lupoloid?
Yeah.
Bathroom breaks.
Okay, so I am going to get straight... Oh, Pierre, before I get straight into it, did you want to tell us about City of the Month?
Yes, I had it open. Catch me off guard. It was a city in Spain.
Oh,
Sorry.
is it in Malaga?
Arrecife.
Arrecife, right?
And then Dublin was second, and then the last on the podium was Birmingham.
How strange that
Dublin
this
comes up quite a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
city in Spain.
It's probably, but I mean, I presume sometimes these are just like hubs for like data centers or something.
Maybe.
DNS. Yeah. It's really in the.
Is it near Malaga?
Oh wait.
Why do you keep saying that, Ian?
Because Vodafone has its big innovation centre in Malaga.
Yes, it does.
We've been talking a bit about that, I'm sure, recently.
Well, we might actually,
Did I
our
just
final
write
segment, we might mention that together with the other thing that I mentioned. So let's crack on. What we're going to do, we're going to start by talking about AI, mainly because Ericsson just did a report, and the Telecoms.com headline on the report was "Consumers expect to lose control of AI," and then you covered it as well, Ian, and your angle was Ericsson House of AI Horrors provokes hope and fear. Your standard line in hyperbolic headlines there.
Yeah.
And you got and you got a picture of some AI generated fashion as imagined by Ericsson.
Yeah.
Which is a sort of digital dress. I don't know what we're supposed to do with that.
No. Well, you can imagine yourself in it. You can probably superimpose your head over the top of it.
Right. Is that the
I look
point?
lovely there.
Yeah, all this virtual metaverse. You don't need to go to shops anymore. Fuck off.
Well, it's much worse
Of course
than
you
that.
need to go to
Some of the
shops.
stuff in this Consumer Lab report.
Well, there we go. Well, so let's not jump the gun. And the second thing we're going to talk about is Nvidia, partly because they just overtook Apple with a 3 trillion market cap. You know, having the whole time I've been covering Nvidia, which must be about 20 years. You know, they were always a fairly successful company, but they were these sort of niche graphics cards and shit like that. And now they're suddenly bigger than Apple. It's fucking mental.
Right place, right time.
Yeah, totally. And obviously that's AI, so there's a natural segue there.
Yeah.
And then we're also going to mention you, Ian, wrote a story where you looked into them much more from a specific telecoms angle.
Yeah.
A nice picture of Jensen Huang, their founder and CEO, in his trademark leather jacket.
Yeah.
And then we might finish off with a couple of things. We just touched on the fact that Vodafone's got a lab in Malaga, where when I wrote it up, I ventured that maybe they're not the most productive because they're too busy hanging out on the beach. And then we might also mention something to do with 6 gigahertz spectrum.
Not to be mixed up with 6G.
Not to do, yeah. Although they're trying to make it synonymous. So I suppose there's a sort of poetic sort of...
Someone might write a sonnet about it, maybe, if they're really bored.
Ode to 6 gigahertz. 6 gigahertz. What is the point of thee?
We can ask ChatGPT to write that.
Actually, Jamie used to write poems.
He did. He did. He wrote one about Ericsson once that went viral there. They loved
were
it.
quite amusing.
Yeah.
I remember. I liked that. I miss those. And we used to have a haiku section that got scrapped.
Yeah, like reading.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I'm going to ask ChatGPT to write something, see if anything good comes up.
Okay.
Right.
So, well, that plays into the main segment then, and we'll get started on that. And I've got another angle on AI that I mustn't forget. But why don't I pass the ball to you, Ian? Why don't you tell us about Ericsson's House of AI Horrors?
Well, they did this. They have a thing called the Consumer Lab report that I think's been... All right, let's do this first. Because
Hold on, what's Pierre found?
In the boundless realm where signals soar, beyond the peaks of what's explored, there lies a spectrum, bright and new, a realm of possibilities, a future's hue. Oh, 6G, ethereal wave, you herald forth what dreams engrave. Sorry. This is quite funny. So here to you, oh 6G wave, the silent guardian, the unseen brave. With every bite,
You know, it goes on, doesn't it?
with every beam, you bring us closer to our dream. Sorry, yeah.
That's pretty good.
I mean, it is more
I mean,
in the middle, but yeah.
It's got to be said.
Your
with-
frequency's a cosmic dance, in every pulse, in every glance.
Jesus Christ.
It's going to happen throughout the rest of the pod.
What worries me is
blurt
it did
shit
that
out.
in about 5 seconds.
I know. Well,
Less than that.
Well, this is part of it. Is you and I are both. You're inclined to be a bit Eeyore-ish anyway, and I'm inclined to be a bit Luddite and a bit. It's Terminator's just round the corner, but I certainly try and force myself to go. On the other hand, AI can be a really useful tool. You know, Pierre's just come up with a frivolous example of it, but in terms of automating repetitive tasks, in terms of doing lots of shit, or even really really cutting edge stuff like being better at diagnosing X-rays or whatever than the human eye or something like that. And while all of that still plays into fears, which I'm sure we're about to get to, so I'm kind of jumping the gun and then I'll shut up, into fears about, you know, making humans obsolescence and the fucking Skynet taking over and all that sort of thing. You know, we can't deny the fact that it's here and it does a lot of really useful shit as well. But anyway, having said all that, unless Pierre's got any more poetry for us.
No, it's funny you're mentioning Skynet,
I thought that was a Spurs top for a sec, mate.
No, is Nvidia the Skynet basically?
It might do useful shit, but it does useful shit that maybe we want to do.
Yes, well, quite well. So let's get back into it. Let me just quickly explain to our audience why I said I thought it was Spurs top. Pierre's an Arsenal fan, but he's also French, and it just so happens that both Spurs and the French, for some reason, revere the cock as their little symbol. So I presume that's like a French.
The rooster, you know, still able to sing even though his feet.
What's that?
Are
French Football Federation.
In
is that
shit.
what Triple F is?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway,
there was a good headline in the newspaper this week by some writer who said it was something like, "I don't want AI to do writing and art while I clean the toilet. I want AI to clean the toilet while I do writing and art."
Yes. Well, that's brilliant. That's
And
spot on.
I think this is one of the problems with it, is that this perception amongst the guys who are making a lot of money out of it, who don't really care about these things because ambition drives them and they're just trying to solve problems and make money and push boundaries. And I get that because they don't think about things like this. But I hate this line that we hear actually parroted in telecom as well when you talk to people about efficiencies and job cuts, and they sort of go, "Oh no, it just frees people up to do more interesting stuff," and it doesn't really free people up to do more interesting stuff.
Because we still got to earn a living.
It might free them up, but sometimes these days it seems to be replacing the interesting stuff, and that's an example of it. You know, that's a passable sonnet. You could have, if some GCSE student had been told to write an amusing sonnet about 6G and they put that together, their teacher would probably gone, "This is actually pretty good."
This shit must be a nightmare for teaching.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually taught, I did classroom teaching for 1 year before I became a journalist. So this would be 20 or so years ago. In fact, it was exactly 20 years ago because my son's just turned 20 and he was born while I was a teacher.
Yeah.
And I taught in a class and some kids would hand in homework where different paragraphs were different fonts and different font sizes. So in other words, they copied from the internet, but they hadn't even bothered to like just copy values, you know. And so I'd just go, if you're gonna plagiarize and cheat, at least bother to change the font and chuck it back at them and say do it again. And
he's going to be right at the front of the queue for ChatGPT, isn't he? That kid. Yeah.
So I could spot it, and maybe. I mean, I suppose what teachers really have to be able to do is to spot, you know, if it's I think this particular person was like a 14-year-old girl.
Right.
And you got some sense of what 14-year-old girls in the whole are capable of and some sense of what she as an individual are capable of. And if suddenly there's this stuff with loads of long words and really erudite, you're like, hold on a fucking minute.
Yeah.
But then there was also the font thing that made it easy for me to spot that. But now it's so much more sophisticated with AI. I wouldn't want to be a teacher trying to work out whether something was AI generated or written by the kid.
No, I wouldn't either, and I don't know how you go about doing it. And my oldest son's at university in Denver, and I know that, you know, he's sort of experimented with using ChatGPT to put together presentations, which I think is the thing that Scott Petty at Vodafone actually encouraged us to use it for. Or he was sort of saying, "Oh, have you used Copilot yet? It's a really useful tool to do presentations."
Yeah, and he also talked about it automatically transcribing and summarising meetings.
Yeah.
Which sounds like a fucking handy thing.
That does sound like a
meetings.
handy thing,
They
because
wind me
nobody's ever going to go, "Oh, I miss transcribing all those interviews," and nobody ever said that.
I've got to do some of that soon. I mean,
that's where I think it's a valuable tool and something that you want to make use of. But where, if you're a writer, then what you don't want to see happening is generative AI doing the writing.
No.
If you actually like doing writing as a job, if that's what you get pleasure from doing, the last thing you want to see happening is generative AI coming along and putting articles together. If you would always think, if you're someone who takes any kind of pride in your work, that you're going to be able to do it better than a machine. And probably that's the case, I suspect, for people who are trying to write at a higher end, you know, the best writers in the world, clearly. But I mean, that's a good example of how how it's like you were saying, it's getting
you can
quite
do that
hard
now
to tell
at a moment's notice. Yeah.
And I don't see that taking away something that somebody gets pleasure from is necessarily a positive.
No, it's definitely not positive. I mean, what you can't argue with, where I'll describe myself as a Luddite, partly tongue-in-cheek. What you can't argue with is technological progress. If the tool's there, it's there to be used. You can no more put that genie back in the bottle than you could put Industrial Revolution tools back in the bottle. To slightly mix up the metaphor there.
I don't know. A decent solar flare might take care of that.
I don't agree with that really. I mean, I don't like. That's one of those adages that I don't really like.
But you can't.
I know you can't
if it's
stop
out there.
I know you can't stop it from happening. That there's always going to be experimentation. There's always going to be people try. Like I say, the Sam Altmans of this world are obviously going to go off and try and do what they possibly can. But nothing, they're unconstrained, those guys. They don't even think about morality. Anybody thinking properly about morality wouldn't even be talking about artificial general intelligence, because what is artificial general intelligence if they're talking about human level intelligence, and they're actually not even talking about human level intelligence. Jensen Huang's talking about something that exceeds that. What will happen with, as the most intelligent form of life on this planet, we have not been a positive thing for lower forms of intelligence. With the exception maybe of your dog and a few sort of well-treated cats, lower forms of intelligence have not done well out of.
No.
And
factory
if an alien,
farming, defoliation, and all that stuff.
If a superior form of intelligence was to come from a different part of the universe and arrive on this planet, we'd be extremely worried about it.
Yeah.
And the chances are, given what people are like themselves in terms of how human nature is, and it would probably lead to war, conflict. It would probably lead to. I don't think it would necessarily be a positive thing. It's not going to be in AGI's interests. That the top of its sort of priority list is not going to be the welfare of humanity. The top of its priority list is going to be the welfare of AGI. If we're properly talking about something that fits the description of AGI.
No, I largely agree with you. I would just say you've made the intuitive leap that I normally do first, which is to go from where we are now to fucking Skynet. But
that's all you can do if you're looking at the end game, and that's what they're doing.
But that's an extrapolation, and any extrapolation has a wider margin for error the further forward in time you go. But I agree with you. There was a thing I nearly wrote up this week. A bunch of ex-OpenAI people, but a couple of ones from other AI things like Gemini and that sort of thing wrote a letter. They created a website that is basically going, hold on a fucking minute. This is all getting a bit scary. And you're right, Sam Altman is probably the single most apparently reckless cheerleader of AI sort of development, although maybe Jensen Huang's in there as well.
Yeah. Why would we want a super intelligence on planet Earth? I don't understand why anybody would want that. We've not been a good thing for other species, for other forms of intelligence. Why would anybody invite that into the world?
That thing can come up with like cold fusion and we have free electricity?
Yeah, but you're thinking about it in terms of it's there as a servant to us. If it's a proper AGI, if it fits the description, if it's not a tool, in which case it's not AGI, right? So if it's actually AGI and it exceeds human level intelligence, which is what Jensen Huang's saying it's going to do, it will not be interested in doing things for the benefit of human beings. It will be interested in doing things. It will be sentient, and it will be interested in doing things for its own benefit.
Well, you've built a lot of suppositions into that, such that just because it's more intelligent than us on one level, let's say in terms of sort of number crunching and
then it's not AGI.
But I don't think, does AGI necessarily have to be this sort of Terminator level, self-aware, self-interested thing?
That's what the general intelligence means, is that it's something that's multi-purpose, that has. Otherwise, the name doesn't live up to scrutiny, basically.
Okay, well, but I still think the point I'm trying to make.
What am I going to do next, by the way, because I've finished my Lupaloid.
Oh well, do you want to try the really weak one? And just
go on then.
Contrast?
That's why we have the Isaac.
It's not touching the sides of it, is it, Ian?
Is it Isaac?
They're not very big cans.
Isaac Asimov.
I'm only about halfway through mine.
Asimov. The 3 laws,
The 3 laws of robotics.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, those are about not causing harm to humans.
Can we just program that in?
Yeah, but the problem is that it's...
Okay, let's go.
If you have something that...
Should we go with Tech Target, as we're about to become one with them, and we're about to be assimilated? So, a guide to artificial intelligence in the enterprise. What is artificial general intelligence? AGI is the representation of generalized human cognitive abilities in software so that faced with an unfamiliar task, the AGI system could find a solution. The intention of an AGI system is to perform any task that a human being is capable of. And then it goes on to say definitions vary. So the only point I'll make, so you're completely right, it's designed, obviously they're not going to stop as, let's say the average human IQ is 100, which I don't know if that's true, but maybe that's what the test's designed for it to be. Anyway, they're not going to stop at an IQ of 100, are
But
they?
I wouldn't think in terms of those parameters even, because I don't think IQ
Yeah, it doesn't
itself
apply.
I mean, human intelligence includes all sorts of things. By the way, I don't think this is very realistic. I'm not saying that we're going to end up with this. I think the talk of AGI in 2027 is total bullshit.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, it's not.
But at the rate of progress now,
I don't think
to see it not that far away.
The thing I was just describing, which is some superior form of intelligence that does things out of its own interests, in the kind of Terminator scenario, I think is bullshit. Yeah, I don't believe that we're on the cusp of having that.
Right.
In
So why are we talking
2027.
about it then?
Because the point I was trying to make is that people like Sam Altman and Jensen Huang they're unconstrained.
That's where they're headed.
They're not thinking about, if you could get there, what are the consequences for people? They're not thinking, is this a positive thing or is it a negative thing to have a super intelligence?
No, I agree. And
they're thinking, can we do it?
And this thing that I nearly wrote about this week, where people have created this website called something like, I can't remember, Right to Decide or something. They're basically voicing exactly the same objection as you, which is like, hold on a sec. I mean, the ideal we're aiming for is AGI with baked-in guardrails. Now, I know you're going to think that's impossible, but I'm just saying the idea. It's always useful to have an ideal to see where we'd want to end up. So some kind of baked-in guardrails whereby, you've got the standard like futuristic robot thing where it's programmed to not harm humans, and then they break their programming, and then you get Will Smith blowing them all up or something.
Yeah.
But that's what you'd want. You'd
Well,
want
that was
these.
the dilemma I think that Isaac Asimov foresaw, was
Right.
that these three
I'm gonna
laws
look
of
that one up as well.
robotics were. I mean, the Will Smith film, I don't think is supposed to be based on this short story I, Robot, but it's very, very different.
Yeah.
I, Robot's actually a series of short stories, I think, but it's supposed to be kind of like an amalgam of them. But it's. I don't think it is really.
Do you mind if I quickly butt in and read the three laws? Because I just looked them up. So the three laws presented from the fictional, quote, Handbook of Robotics, 56th edition, 2058 AD. So, we're only about 30 years away. The first law, a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. So that one, you've already got all kinds of...
Well, that's the one in the movie where someone's drowning.
So there's,
quite.
there's two of them drowning, and the computer goes, or the robot goes. The guy, Will Smith, has got a better chance of survival than the girl.
Yeah. So he's making calculations.
And apparently, so the girl had 1% chance of survival, and he had 12%.
Yeah.
So it went for him. And Will Smith can't cope with this. It frustrates him because he's like, a human being wouldn't have made that decision. They'd have gone for the little girl
Because she's a cute little girl. And she's got a longer life ahead of her.
Yeah, for all sorts of reasons, you go for the little girl, and that's the decision that a human would have taken. And I thought it's actually quite a good film.
And everyone dies.
I don't think
Yeah,
it got
it wasn't
very well reviewed. I thought it was quite a good.
But the
film,
other one that really jumped out at me is, you get these...
Finish the last so we can...
well, let me just quickly say this, and then I'll get on to the second one. It says, or through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. So what if one human being was about to shoot another human being? What the fuck does it do then?
I think it's trying to stop them from...
Yeah, but it can't injure a human being.
Well...
So what I'm saying is that there's a contradiction in the first law. Anyway, second law, a robot must obey the orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law.
Yeah.
So you can't tell the robot to go and hurt someone.
Or hurt yourself.
Yeah.
But like you said, the first law itself has a contradiction.
Massive contradiction. Yeah.
But I think Asimov knew this, and that's what.
I'm not saying these are definitive.
Yeah,
they're just interesting
that sets
conversation
up these
points.
stories in iRobot and the kind of dilemmas that come about because of it.
And then third law, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. And then the other problem this comes into, which is very Terminator-y, is if baked into this AI is for it to protect its own existence, that's where you get to this sort of, hold on a sec, humans are a threat to my existence, so maybe I can override those first two laws.
Yeah, there's a David Mitchell book called Ghost Written where there's an AI and it's not quite short stories, but it's kind of interlinked kind of events that are happening, and the last sequence of it is set in a future where the radio show host a bit like us here. There's a guest that keeps dialing in that he's talking to that turns out to be an AI.
Right.
And through the conversations it has with the radio show host, it figures out that the best thing for humanity would actually to be wiped out. So it triggers a nuclear war.
You're saying how
Because otherwise they'll just basically ruin themselves anyway and destroy the planet or something. So
you're saying how when you two are on holiday, I got to do a pod by myself.
yeah,
Could do it with AI, couldn't I?
you could do an AI pod.
I could
you
set
could
up
do like Whacking Phoenix.
GPT,
Yeah.
and just do the whole pod with AI. That's an interesting thing. Although, if it went well, then I'd have to top myself.
Yeah. That's a very dark road to go down.
Or just not that I employ or pay you to, but sack you to because you're obsolete. Anyway, so let's bring it back to.
We were going to go to the Ericsson thing, weren't we?
Well, that was but this being AI, it lends itself to tangents, and that was a fun tangent. But let's bring it back. Tell us a bit more about what Ericsson.
So they have these reports they put out every now and again called Consumer Lab reports. They're a bit like their mobility reports, but these ones I've never, to be honest with you, ever looked at one of them before. And I looked at this one this week because it was quite a quiet news week.
Yeah.
I needed something to write today quickly before I came in, and it came out a couple of days ago, I think, actually. But so I made it a kind of commentary piece rather than news. But
which is generally what you do anyway, news analysis.
Yeah, I mean, this is very much commentary. It's not even in the main column of our site. But they apparently they went and surveyed 6,500 people aged something like 16 to 70, so broad age range, and asked them for their sort of views about AI, and then they kind of divided people into these two categories: the AI hopefuls and the AI fearfuls.
We're definitely the latter, aren't we?
We're the latter, but the hopefuls are people who, when they think about AI, they're kind of broadly optimistic, and they kind of feel quite interested in it and what the possibilities. And the fearfuls are people who are obviously, quite anxious about what could happen.
Yeah, glass half full, glass half empty. That sort of thing.
And my instinct would be to think, well, most people are probably going to be fearful because AI is viewed as one of those big sort of disruptive changes that's happening.
Indeed.
A bit like climate change, let's say, or possibility of future pandemics or nuclear proliferation, those sorts of things. But the headline finding was like that 51% of people were in the hopeful category.
Yeah.
There's only 34% in the fearful category.
Which is fascinating, isn't it?
Well, it's fascinating until you look at who the people were that they were talking to.
Fucking
which are
idiots.
Early adopters of technology.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So
of course.
So they were
kind of
all
self-selecting.
urban dwellers. And they were all early adopters. And I think if you look at early adopters as a percentage of the population, it's about 13-14% is what other studies say. And the early adopters are people who sort of volunteer for remote control surgery, or to have like brain implants, or to go down in submarines.
I would say that's a very niche subset of early adopters, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're people who are more adventurous when it comes to technology.
Well, and also more unconditionally embracing of it. Like I did when I was more of just a general tech journalist. You'd see how excited people would get about the new Apple thing.
Yeah.
And I think they view it two ways. They view it more prosaically. They view it as a tool, and that's fair enough. Here's an exciting tool that can do new things, make me more productive, improve my life, whatever. But then there's a sort of more mystical, almost worshipping at the tech altar thing, like it's a magic device. Yeah. And that was certainly, they used to call the iPhone the Jesus phone because there was such veneration of the fucking thing.
Yeah.
So I think that, you get those two mindsets coexisting in the early adopter.
Yeah. I mean, what I thought was interesting is that if they did go around and speak to these early adopters, who are people that you would probably expect to be more positive about AI and technology, because they're not the Luddites. They're not the people who are kind of, oh no, any change is bad. That even though they were talking to that category, it was only a very small majority that was in the hopefuls category, and a third of them being quite worried about it.
Right.
And the other thing was that the examples that Ericsson was giving of this kind of, I mean, I don't necessarily know if I call it an AI nirvana, but the way that AI could be used. And Ericsson itself wasn't kind of weighing in and saying this is an example of a good use of AI or a bad use of AI. Yeah. But they were pretty freakish as far as I could see. They were. I mean, there were sort of things that you might see coming up in some kind of Terry Gilliam movie about the future. There was one to do with people using AI. 6 out of 10 respondents saying AI will be used in the future to aid plastic surgery and pick the perfect face for you. And some other ones saying that you could basically simulate your marriage and work out whether there are going to be problems in the future.
Oh, yes. I just got your paragraph. You go, for anyone with the willies ahead of his or her wedding day, AI can help you decide. According to 50% of respondents who apparently, quote, think people will simulate their marriages for future changes or divorce, close quote.
We actually had this funny talk with Mike and Scott Blackburn, anyway, in Dallas, where Mike was like, can you imagine a wife finding out that you wrote your vows with ChatGPT?
Yeah.
It's like nothing came from the heart. It was just all generated.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had a busy day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds quite dark.
You went,
Yeah.
Copilot, Copilot, make some fucking empty promises to my missus so I can get her in the sack.
I won't read it, but I'll give it a try now, see what it comes up with.
Oh, my God. Here we go.
No, another one.
Talking about letting
It's
the genie out of the bottle.
Anyway, I know. I just never go anywhere near that.
He never does his young Jamie thing, and now suddenly you can't get him off the laptop looking stuff up. So anyway, yeah, and I agree. All that stuff's very dystopian. I mean,
there was something else I think
go
about
on.
offspring not being very creative or imaginative, but having better technical skills. Because, yeah, I guess if you're getting, all your poems about 6G that you might write, when you're feeling, in the mood, done by ChatGPT, then people won't. This is one of the concerns I have about it, actually. I thought that was quite an interesting one, that they feel it might affect emotional or creative intelligence. And this is sort of feedback I've had at a personal level from my older son in the States, that if you rely too much on these...
Emotionally unintelligent.
Yeah, well, that. But if you rely on these tools to do essay writing, you lose the skills to do essay writing.
Totally.
If you're a student and it's convenient and quick to put together a presentation with ChatGPT, as Scott Petty was sort of urging us to do, or to write your essay on Henry VIII with ChatGPT, and then just fiddle around with it a bit so it doesn't quite look like ChatGPT, you basically lose the ability to put together essays, and if you're a composer and you lean on it to write music, you probably lose the ability to write music after a while, and the skills that are needed there. And I find that really, really frightening. That's almost the scariest thing about it, I think, is that it being used for cognitive. Like we're not worried about it being used for toilet cleaning, but nobody's talking about using AI for toilet cleaning. These days they're talking about. I mean, toilet cleaners probably would be worried about an AI that gets used for toilet cleaning, but
actually,
we seem to be more comfortable with manual tasks being automated.
Well, because it's more easy to see AI supplanting white collar, like desk-based stuff.
It is.
Than stuff that involves anything manual. You'll still need a robot.
Well, this is why it's interesting, because it's quite different from earlier phases of automation, where it was actually it was actually taking away manual effort. And the reason we didn't worry about that, I think, and obviously people who were affected by it worried about it, because that's why we have movements like the Luddites. They're not a bunch of nutters running around smashing up machinery just for the sake of it. They were obviously thinking, how do I put food on the table in future? Indeed. So they actually had valid reason to do it. But the reason, I think, looking back, that we don't think it was all that bad is because it led to other jobs, people actually operating the machines, and people managing the people operating the machines. But if you get a situation where AI is doing the cognitive stuff as well, then it really starts to raise questions about what is left for people.
No, I mean, half the time when I'm pushing back on you, I mean, devil's advocate, I largely concur with
when I say AI
concerns
here, because we had that conversation at the start about AGI, I don't even like the expression AI particularly. And I did mention Richard Windsor, I think, in my commentary. And the reason I don't like the expression AI is very much to do with his line of thinking on this, which I agree with. I'm very much on his side of thinking with this stuff, that it's... And this is why, by the way, when I was saying I don't think they're going to get to this vision that they have, this dream that they seem to have, but I'm not sure is actually a nice thing for the rest of us of AGI by the late 2020s or the early 2030s, is because all they're doing is putting more processing power into these. All Nvidia does, and all these companies do, is just create more and more complex large language models and put more. They just throw more resources at it in the hope that if you build a bigger model, you'll get something that's more refined. And the problems that Richard Windsor has analysed and looked at in his blogs are that there are the things that these large language models don't have any understanding of causality. And they can't reason, and those are two key characteristics basically of
and then you pulled out a quote in that same paragraph where you've remembered your own writing well.
I did write this just before I came in.
Oh right, this is fresh. And then you quoted Richard Windsor saying that they're simply very advanced statistical pattern recognition systems.
Yeah.
And yes, and that's true. And so I agree that artificial intelligence, it gets chucked around as if these things are thinking. They're not thinking. What they are doing is crunching a hell of a lot of fucking data in a very short amount of time, so that they're able to produce something like Pierre was reading that creates the impression of thought and creativity. Whereas what it's really doing is just drawing from huge amounts of data from the internet and from their large language training.
Yeah, I mean, all those
and
words that
collating
were
it.
in that sonnet will have been, I mean, unseen brave. I think I've come across that before. You know, even things that sound like vaguely original and poetic there.
Yeah.
It will just have taken those from, it will have done a big, deep dive on internet data and worked out that you can put these words together and it has this effect. And yeah, and it's a plagiarist and something that rips off what people have done basically before it. And this is what it can't do, is where I have some optimism about our own role perhaps. We're both going to Copenhagen in a couple of weeks' time, as is Pierre, and we'll go there and speak with people like Scott Petty and other
of course,
executives
Strandy, who lives there.
And you'll get their views on things and what's going on, and you'll get a lay of the land, and then you'll go off and write something that doesn't exist online at that stage in time because it's new. It's what people have been saying to you. But I quote someone who's
also our talking about DTW, our journalistic skeptical eye. Like last year, I ruffled a few feathers by saying that the keynotes were a bit shit.
Yeah.
Would AI have A, being able to make that qualitative judgment at all, and B, being inclined to take the risk of upsetting people? I mean, that would have depended on its programming prior to that, wouldn't it?
Because the presentations that you saw had just happened, and there was no record of them on the internet at that time anyway.
Yeah.
So,
but even if you were feeding,
exactly.
Let's say you've got some new AI that has a microphone and a video camera going, and is able to process analog events in real time.
Yeah.
Even then, the best you could hope that they would do is they'd have a really good natural language transcription service and some way of sorting it all and saying, and then they said, and then they said, and then they said. I doubt they could even add analytical paragraphs of like the significance of what they just said is this, that, and the other.
What you could probably do is in the question that you ask it, in the prompt that you ask it, just like he's asked it to write a sonnet about 6 gigahertz, you could say, write a scathing assessment of this presentation they've just done and point out this and this, and then it'll run off and maybe do a decent job on it. I don't know.
And so while we're being dystopian, and I'm going to have to move it on as well beyond the Ericsson thing, because we've got other stuff we want to talk about and we want to get done.
We've been talking about this for that long.
Well, no, we just got a shorter amount of time. We've got less than an hour and a half for this as well. So we're not usually the first one goes on for about an hour by itself.
Yeah.
But yeah, we only started about half an hour ago.
Oh.
That's about right. How far on? Yeah, okay. The programming. So like there was a recent fuss by Gemini, which is Google's one, where some people, I think, did an image search for US presidents or something like that.
That's one of Google's ones. They seem to have a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It's the best known brand that I associate with Google for me anyway. And it came up with a bunch of black ones, and there's only been one, Barack Obama, which is famously the first black president. And they even the mischievous investigators even said like famous Nazis, and it came up with some black ones. And to the best of my knowledge, there aren't any black Nazis. That's kind of the point of being a Nazi, isn't it? Anyway, the point is that somehow they had. At least this is the narrative. I'm sure it's much more complicated than this. Somehow they put some kind of woke bias in their findings. And I think if you do Google searches as well, you'll tend to find, if you use another browser like Brave or DuckDuckGo, you'll get different answers. So basically all these and what these large language models are, to some extent, they could be viewed as just search engines on steroids, couldn't they?
Yeah.
And so the point is there's bias in the algorithms, and there'll be bias in the AI algorithms. And so, even if you asked it to, let's say, be scathing about a keynote that it was able to transcribe in real time, maybe the algorithm would make it stay its hand and not be as petty and vindictive as I might be.
Yeah, I think search algorithms on steroids is a really good description of what these these generative AI tools are actually. You can type a question into Google now, like tell me who's the greatest tennis player of all time.
Yeah.
It'll throw up a few links to there's this discussion about whether it's Rafael Nadal or Roger Federer or Novak Djokovic.
Yeah.
That's basically what ChatGPT is doing, except in a more sophisticated form.
Or they might go a bit more woke and they say it's Billie Jean King because she was the first lesbian or something like that.
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, you don't know what bias they're going to have. If it's purely statistical, it has to be one of the three you mentioned, doesn't it?
Yeah, I didn't mean men when I said that.
Yeah.
I didn't use the word men. I'd have been told off by Andy Murray at a
and if
press
it was women, it
conference
would be Serena Williams or
Yeah,
Margaret
of
Court
course.
or Martina Navratilova
Yeah.
or whatever. But again, if that was purely statistical, but if it had a sort of an idealizing social filter,
Yeah.
it might be biased towards someone like Billie Jean King or Serena Williams over Margaret Court, who I think was quite bigoted, wasn't she, Margaret
She
Court?
was. Yeah. Well, that's why her reputation's kind of
it's kind of tarnished.
by
But the
that.
point is, none of that, their opinions or even their skin colour or sexual preference has got fuck all to do with their tennis ability. But it might filter in that way. I'm just saying these are ways in which these things can get contaminated. And I'm sure people would argue it's good that they're contaminated. That's why I'm not even making a value judgment. I'm just saying it's an example that came up with this Gemini thing recently where there seemed to be a bit of a right-on filter, which led to inaccurate responses because the algorithm was imprecise and it was unable to take account. If it was aiming for a certain outcome, but the underlying data didn't produce that outcome, it seemed to override the underlying data and sort of manufacture stuff. I'm sure these are just little quirks that they have to iron out, but they're further grist to your dystopian mill of if it decides it knows what's best,
Yeah.
then it's just taking over.
Yeah, exactly.
If you don't mind,
The only other thing before you move it on is why is Ericsson so interested in all this?
Yeah.
And this actually is almost a segue into the next section anyway, I think. But
I've got a little another AI bit before we.
I just think everybody's now so desperate to have anything that any technology company is so desperate to sort of pin their colours to the AI mast. And what does Ericsson have to do with AI? I mean, they make telecom equipment. Okay, you can use AI to what the kinds of AI that, by the way, Ericsson's using are not the sort of, it's not the stuff that we've just been talking about. We're talking about much older kind of predictive AI systems to do things like fault maintenance and figure out when something's about to go wrong on a base station, just because lots of the data is showing, worrying trends. But it's not the stuff that's come around since 2022 that's ChatGPT, but they're also desperate to have AI as part of their story because they've looked at this company called Nvidia and its share price, and they've gone, oh, we want a bit of that. And that's why they've done this report, basically.
And also it comes at a time, like we've spoken in recent pods about telecom recession, where there aren't many exciting things going on in our industry. They're going to jump on whatever bandwagon they can.
But it's very unclear why someone like Ericsson or Nokia or any of those companies can really sort of benefit from this, I think.
Yeah.
In the way that Nvidia is. But
I'm just looking at
try
a bit of our report that sort of is consistent with the headline that who wrote this for us, Mary. So her headline, just to remind us, consumers expect to lose control of AI. And then there's...
That's even darker than my one.
Yeah. Well, look, and there's a couple of... grab that. That'll be cold. God, your streets ahead. What do you think?
First one?
No, I'm halfway through the second one. What do you think of that 2.5% one? I wasn't that.
It's a bit boring, wasn't
that
really?
mad about it? Yeah, just won't do. So I'll get that one down me so I can get onto some real man's beer. What was I going to say? Yeah, so like we got one little excerpt she extracted from the Ericsson report where it said, quote, in this chaotic future, personal identity could become an endangered species. As many as 74% of the AI fearful dread a world where AIs clone every aspect of you, your voice, your face, your signature and more, the report warns. And that kind of leads me on to my other bit of AI that I want to talk about, which is what I wrote this morning before coming out, where my headline was Smartphone Guru hints at dystopian AI-dominated, quote, post-app, close quote, future. And this smartphone guru is a bloke called Carl Pei, who founded the OnePlus brand and has now got another brand rather sort of bafflingly called Nothing.
Yeah. That no one's ever heard of and doesn't seem to have done anything.
Yeah, and it came out with a phone a little while back, and there was loads of hype. He's good at hype, and he's one of those quite. He comes over as quite a sort of smug technologist. Like, you know, he'll be sitting there slouching in a sort of office chair, going, "Let me tell you about the future," and you're like, "Oh, shut the fuck up! Are you Nostradamus?"
Yeah.
And anyway, I'm probably being a bit harsh. In fact, the latest video he did, he seemed less smug than he has in the past.
Well, that's not
maybe having
surprising.
sold fuck all phones has knocked him down a
That's
peg or two.
hubris.
Guys, I may have been wrong.
Yeah, you know all that hyping I was doing. Anyway, but he's just come out with a thing. Unfortunately, God, it's so annoying. For some reason, I think it's our site. It won't embed Twitter links right now. I just get this thing saying x.com refused to
That'll
connect.
be that brilliant CMS, Scott.
There we are. Let's not go there. But I've got the video up. Anyway, he put it up on Twitter, and I'll just extract some of the stuff that I described about it. So I said, here's a quote from him. "In the future, there will be no more apps. The operating system knows everything it needs to know about you, and it will call on all the services and string them together to make your day easier." Now, and I haven't put a full stop at the end of easier there. Bad me. Maybe I'll prove my thing in real time. And so that just bothers me as someone who doesn't like being told what to do by human beings, let alone fucking uppity machines. It's like, it's all this sort of surrendering of agency and autonomy to the machines. You know, him saying that, you know, that point about it will know everything it needs to know about you and call on the services and string them together to make your day easier. So basically it's taking over. It's going, "Don't worry, Scott, I've got this. You don't need to think. You just sit there and follow prompts that your phone gives you." And then he goes on to say, it's not going to happen overnight because people also love their apps. People are really bought into their app experiences. And you can't just ship a product and be like, "Here, there's no more apps. Are you going to buy it?" So the challenge for us is to build a bridge from today's app-based user experience to tomorrow's post-app world. So he's just determined that there's this post-app world coming up where AI will basically, you know, so by apps, we just mean those little tiles, those icons on the home screen of your phone where you go Spotify or BBC Sport or whatever. And, you know, there's a reason why we have them, because I think I want this. I press the thing I want. There's an interaction between me and the device.
But you've already lost some agency, you know. Because I mean, this is The Machine Stops, isn't it? Have you read that book? It's a short story, actually. The Machine Stops, 1909. E.M. Forster, who's better known for things like The Passage to India.
Yeah.
So The Machine Stops is a science fiction story that he wrote in 1909.
Right.
Where for reasons to do with like global meltdown or whatever, some problem, people live underground and they're supported by an AI that tells them what to listen to.
Amazing how long ago they were writing about AI.
I mean, he basically foresaw kind of what's going on, except for the apocalyptic angle, because you get told what music you should listen to, you get told what to watch each day, you get told what to eat.
Yeah.
But we're not too far from that now. People with their Spotify preferences and their recommendations of what you should be watching on
and you
Netflix.
Get people, sometimes I go around people's houses who use Alexa a lot, and they go, "Alexa, play me some cool music." And I'm like, even that, I'm like, no, I'm going to fucking pick what I'm going to listen to.
That's exactly what The Machine Stops was all about. But you know what news? This is one of the problems with social media. You know, that people go into their own little echo chambers and then they get told by social media what they should be looking at news-wise. And
that's true.
The algorithm works.
No, we're all getting choices made for us already.
You know, it takes free will.
That doesn't mean
away.
We shouldn't fight it.
Jack Dorsey actually did a thing that Elon Musk put up this morning that I noticed on, which got me thinking about The Machine Stops, because he was obviously at some event recently and they were talking about free speech, which is Elon Musk's big bugbear. Yeah. And Jack Dorsey went, the thing we should really be worrying about is free will. And I don't mean free will in the kind of the guy Sam Harris sort of sense where he starts to get quite semantic about it. Just in the sense of these algorithms are guiding you to websites and preferences that you know, you're not actually thinking with the way it used to be in the 80s and the 90s, you know, the era that we grew up in as teenagers and 20-year-olds, is you go and chat to your friends in the, you know, in the lunch break, and what music are you listening to now, and what should we take into, what books have you read, and what films have you seen, and it was all quite word of mouth. Whereas now, you know, and your friends, you meet your friend, you meet your girlfriends, you know, when you're 16, 17 in the pub or in the park or whatever it might be. Whereas now it's all about, swiping right, and these are the women you're going to see. These are the women that the AI system, or well, it's not an AI system, but they would call it that.
And I'm sure there's countless articles and books about how online dating often yields very unsatisfactory results because, let's say, you can't predict it. Let's say I always thought, perhaps in a slightly narcissistic way, that I always fancied tall blondes.
Yeah.
And so if I was using a dating app, I'd only do tall blondes. Well, my wife's short and dark.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'd never have met her.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of... I mean, you can't filter for superficial things like that. And it's only once you meet someone and get to know them to know whether or not you fall in love with them, whether you can imagine spending the rest of your life with them and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, that's kind of what bothers me about what he was saying there. And I just made that point. I went, surely people like apps because it's through them they tell their phone what to do. There's still that agency is the key term. I'm still an active agent.
To some extent, but you've lost some of it because once you go into that app, it's telling you to listen to this kind of music and it's telling you to watch these kinds of programs and it's telling you to read these kinds of news stories.
Right now, it's just making suggestions. I go to Spotify, it may well serve up like a metal playlist.
Yeah.
But I could just as easily search for, Slayer. I could search for Slayer South of Heaven and just play all of that, and that's got fuck all to do with Spotify's AI.
You still have the choice to do that,
yeah.
but people have lost something of what they had because a lot of people will just be guided by what those apps
this is back to the agency thing. You're still making a choice. Where it really bothers me is, and what this Carl Pay seems to be talking about is like, don't worry about choice. Don't worry about thinking. We've got that covered.
Yeah.
You just sit back and take it easy. Thinking's stressful. You don't need that in your life. The AI's got it covered. You just put your feet up.
That's where it's going. That's where it's already started to go, and AI will take it further down that road. Okay. I think.
Now, are you saying you don't like when Spotify suggests music to you?
I don't mind. No, I'm slightly pushing back on Ian's point there. In that, by all means, make the suggestions, and I have the agency to go with them or ignore them.
Yeah.
Like, for example, on the way down just now, when I was working and reading The Spectator, I couldn't be fucked to pick something, so I did just get Spotify to just go for a metal mix.
I don't like it.
He doesn't like it.
I don't like it. And where I think it's far worse, actually, than music, and I probably read more books than you two, is...
Not hard in my case.
I've
wrten more books than I read.
Is on recommendations that you might see on Amazon, where because you've read this, you should read this as well. A lot of the things it suggests, I can see why the algorithm's telling me I should read that stuff as well. But I tend to base my reading on, I'll read all sorts of different things, and it often might be something that someone's mentioned to me, or you pick something up in a news piece that you've read for some reason, or there's a book that you've always wanted to read. And if I went down I'm just going to allow myself to be led by what this algorithm's telling me, I wouldn't have read half the stuff that I am actually interested in reading.
I agree.
And I think people, like you say, you do have the agency, obviously, with these apps to choose what you want to do and not just go down this narrow route of recommendations. But a lot of people don't, I think. They, like you said, the people who are relying on Alexa heavily, where it's linked to Spotify, actually. Alexa, play me this through Spotify. Play me a heavy metal playlist through Spotify, and it will only play the stuff that that you've always heard a million times before, and they'll just carry on doing that rather than actually going out and trying to discover something new out of their own kind of free will, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I think where we slightly differ is my red line, and this is completely consistent with my personality, is just being told what to do. As long as I still have agency, you can suggest all you want, and I can tell you to fuck off.
Yeah.
Whereas I think you're a little bit more troubled by how tempting all those suggestions are for people to basically willingly surrender their agency and hand it over.
In the Machine Stops, by the way, they've not surrendered their agency. They're just told this is probably something that you should do.
Right.
This is good for you. You should listen to this. You should eat this.
Well, and then the other problem...
It's the same with these health apps. You shouldn't be doing this at the moment. You should be running 3 times a week.
Well, and that's why I'm not going to... We don't have time to get into the tangent, but one of the real dangers about all these things is when those suggestions then start becoming
a bit more than suggestions.
Because they start coming linked into social credit systems and central bank digital currencies, and suddenly you're like, well, we noticed that you were a bit of a fat drunken bastard last month, so you don't get these privileges.
Yeah.
And all that all these sort of nudge theory on steroids type of stuff. Oh yeah, no, believe me, I can go down the dystopian rabbit hole at least as far as you can. But let me just bring it back to this and then move it on, because we've got a couple of other things we want to talk about. So that was what bothered me. And then let me just read another couple of paragraphs of what I wrote. They come up with a prototype to sort of exemplify this post-app future. And so I wrote, the prototype consists of empowering a phone with a chirpy AI voice that, not content with harvesting your digital footprints, asks you a bunch of unsolicited nosy questions. So in this thing, which you'd have to go to the Twitter link to see it, it starts going, so Ian, do you like this, that and the other? And it just starts poking into your head. And then this culminates in the creating of a unique companion that knows you better than you know yourself. To better enable it to run your life, nothing is exploring ways of it even chirping up when the phone is locked, presumably in order to ensure you're always making the right choices. And I'll just read one more paragraph because I think it leads to what is an interesting point. I said, Luddite caution aside, the automation of repetitive tasks and even the anticipation of your needs by phone-based AI is not only potentially useful but inevitable. But then I said the ideal balance will result from properly empowering the user to control how presumptuous and intrusive their AI buddy will be. Maybe some kind of simple slider on the home screen ranging from STFU to Run My Life would be a simple solution. So STFU is shut the fuck up for people who don't know what that is. So, I mean, that's the thing. That's back to the agency thing. If there was a slider where and it worked, where you could control the amount of AI that infuse everything you do, and from zero to all in, then that would assuage some of my immediate concerns about it. What I don't like is that when you've got these visionaries like Carl Pei or Sam Altman or Jensen Huang going, look, we're smart, we're enlightened, we're rich for a fucking reason, we've got this. You just got, and I'm talking about old books that anticipate some of this stuff. There's a little bit of Brave New World in it, where at the core of that was a drug called Soma that just sort of made everyone, just not bothered.
Yeah.
And this is like a digital version of Soma, where it's like, look, we've got this.
Oh, it's totally what it is.
Don't you worry your pretty little head about life.
Yeah.
We'll live it for you.
No, it's very Brave New World.
And I'm not having that at all.
It's the sort of converse of 1984, where it's all quite hellish in that, and people being tortured and like having rats sort of strapped to their heads.
94 is about force.
Whereas this is about sort of just keep them happy.
People want to go along with it. You don't have to force them.
They don't want to think anymore. As long as you drug them up and
exactly
keep them in a happy place, they won't cause any problems.
Oh man, we could do a whole new podcast just having fun with this sort of dystopian stuff. Yeah. I'm sure loads of people have. But anyway, so let me move on from AI there, because we've got like less than half an hour left. So we keep talking about Jensen Huang and mentioning Nvidia. Why don't you tell us about the story you wrote just yesterday? So the headline, you say, actually, well, let me frame it.
I mean, that's quite nitty gritty.
Let me frame it more broadly. So I think we mentioned it earlier. Nvidia has become the second biggest US company by market cap, with a market cap, which is capitalization, of $3 trillion, which means that the sum total of all its shares adds up to $3 trillion. And this is all on the back. And it's been a viable technology company for a while, but it used to mainly do like graphics cards, and that sort of thing. And it's basically a specialist in what they call parallel processing, which is just like super high intensity processing, as opposed to everyday processing like the CPU you need to run your computer and run Outlook and Excel and that sort of thing. So that's why it's used for graphics, because computer games are obviously very graphically intensive. Yeah. And it turns out that this speciality is great for training large language models, which requires a hell of a lot of computational grunt. So that basically means that Nvidia is the definitive AI stock right now, isn't it? Because it's got, I mean, I should look it up again.
Well, they're the only people, really, I think, who seem to be doing very well out of it.
Right. I know I keep seeing stuff on Tech Meme about how people think Sam Altman's a fucking psycho. Or a sociopath.
I mean, his company, OpenAI, is got a weird sort of structure, hasn't it? It's not for profit, but it's partly funded by Microsoft, clearly.
Well, Microsoft owns like 45%
but it's not publicly
of it
listed or anything like that. So we can't really sort of measure OpenAI.
Yeah, and Elon Musk has got the arsehole with it, because he was part of there at the start, and the whole point of it was that it was supposed to be almost philanthropic.
Yeah.
Now it's very much for profit.
But I guess the generative AI guys, the ones that we can look at on the stock market against Nvidia, would be the public clouds, really, wouldn't they? They're the big tech companies that are backing these large language models. That And
But all of them need Nvidia chips to do the LLM.
no, but I'm just talking
training.
about besides Nvidia, who are the companies
Oh,
that
right,
you
yeah,
look at on a stock market level to sort of see who's done well out of AI. And the only people who really seem to be measurable on that basis anyway are the public kind of clouds, the hyperscalers.
Probably, yeah. I mean, I'm sure there are others, but
For everybody else who's talking a lot about AI, like Ericsson, by the way, with its Consumer Lab report, Ericsson down, like Nokia, same, like banks, like retailers, these companies.
By the way, Pierre,
to,
Nvidia's shares are down 3% today. So maybe they've peaked.
all these companies trying to hop on the AI bandwagon and do something with it and hopefully realize some kind of efficiency and realize some kind of benefits, and maybe it'll lead to new revenue opportunities. It hasn't done anything. Hasn't done anything for anybody except for a cluster of big tech companies and Nvidia. And the weird thing is the other chip makers as well. I mean, maybe partly because of Nvidia and they're not perceived to have a good response to it at the moment. They're in a shit state at the moment. Intel over the last few years hasn't done very well. I think it might have done better recently than it has.
Yeah, well, let's
doing,
put a pin in that, because that will lead to your thing. I just want to have a quick tangent about Nvidia's share price. So, like, for most of the 2000s, it bumped along at about $1 or two. And then even by about 2015, it was bumping on at about $5. Today, an Nvidia share is $1,196.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus Christ. So you basically buy a bunch of them, even as early as 2020, you could get them for a tenth of that.
SMCI is also another one that went crazy.
SMCI?
Is that what they're called? Semiconductor...
You're not talking about the Chinese one?
Super microcomputer.
Oh, Supermicro, yeah, the servers.
Well, they're a server company.
Yeah, they went insane in the past year.
So you could have bought Nvidia at, let me see what that trough is. You could have bought it at $120 on October the 7th, 2022, and you would have 10 times your wedge now.
Yeah.
In fucking less than 2 years.
I think Supermicro is riding on Nvidia's coattails, though, isn't it?
Yeah, well, they're a very well-established server, so they're probably well in there with Nvidia. They'll have the relationships. Anyway, I just wanted to go on that tangent, but you wrote a story, Ian, says Nvidia is emerging as toughest arm wrestle, which I presume... Yeah,
that's got nothing to do with AI, that story, by the way.
No, but we've got a segue now. We're talking about Nvidia.
For sure. So... there's this whole issue of how to what the future radio access network is going to look like, basically, and we've got lots of interest in the telco sector in virtualizing or cloudifying the network, so kind of introducing general purpose processors into the network and using common IT platforms, and the whole rationale is basically you can realize some kind of efficiencies because you're tapping into a much bigger market then. And you can use servers that are common off-the-shelf bits of equipment for not just your radio access network, but other telco workloads as well, and maybe other IT workloads. Instead of buying dedicated kit that only does one thing, you can sort of collapse it all down and have these horizontal platforms that do all sorts of things. And that's kind of this is one of the big themes in telecom at the moment, in its kind of push for efficiencies. So you get this notion of the virtual radio access network.
Yeah.
That we talk about.
Yeah, we spoke about it last week, I think.
Talk about it a lot on the pod, and there are various problems with that. It gets conflated a little bit with Open RAN. It's sort of part of that church.
As you know, I've often struggled with the difference.
The thing about Open RAN is all about introducing competition and diversity into the market, and not having yourself completely reliant on Ericsson and Nokia and Huawei, which are the three big kit vendors, the kind of guys who are doing that dedicated, customized equipment that you would only do your RAN and it wouldn't do anything else. And the idea with Open RAN is you open interfaces between different parts of the network, and you can get specialists into the network and cultivate alternatives to those big guys. But you can also, if you want to conflate it with virtual RAN, you can also start to use maybe some general purpose computing equipment to run your workloads rather than buying these ASICs and dedicated chips to do it. And that's where the problem is, I think, because you've only really had one alternative on that general purpose processor side until now, which is Intel.
Yeah.
This is we've had this as a theme before, but Intel's x86 chips, the Xeon branded sort of family of chips, are the only. You look at every single virtual RAN deployment I think there is today, and it's a tiny share of the overall RAN market, and I think that pretty much all of them are running on Intel general purpose processors.
And it's a tiny share, but it's certainly been times like
I think
in
it's
recent
partly,
World Congress where people have been banging on about it a lot, haven't they?
Well, I think one of the reasons it's a tiny share is because it's only Intel as an option. Now, telcos are really hypersensitive to this issue of dependencies and not having a duopoly or even a monopoly. They've just been through the experience where in Europe where Huawei's been banned from several countries, and they've gone down to having only Ericsson and Nokia as options. They don't want to go and invest in a virtual RAN where one component of that virtual RAN comes from only one company. They want alternatives to it.
Of course.
So there's been this push to have general purpose processors that don't just come from Intel. And the reason, by the way, Intel's so big in virtual RAN, it's just an inheritance of its position in server CPUs generally. It's like 70% market share or something, according to the experts. The biggest one after that's AMD, which is most of the rest of the market.
And the only other x86 player.
The only other x86 player. And I think that's great that AMD's there, but there's still not that much evidence of AMD being used very widely, even though there's a lot of talk about AMD as an alternative.
Well, they've always been very much second fiddle to Intel.
Yeah. And then there's maybe concerns that it's still this x86 system anyway. It'd be good to get something in that's not based on that.
Yeah, and as we've spoken about before, very crudely, one of the big advantages, like I noticed in your piece, you wrote about CISC versus RISC. I'd never heard of CISC. So the ISC in both these acronyms is instruction set computing, and the C in CISC is complex, and the R in RISC is reduced. And that basically summarises what the difference is between the ARM ecosystem and the x86 ecosystem. ARM has basically the way in which the software talks to the chip seems to be more stripped down and more efficient, which basically enables lower power, more power efficient chips.
Yeah. So if you look
at why all the stuff in phones is ARM. There's no fucking x86 in a phone.
Totally. So Intel's dominant position in CPUs and the only other player being AMD, which also uses x86, is mirrored by RISC's dominant position in smartphones, and RISC is pretty much ARM.
Yeah.
It's this UK company whose name
there is a new
itself
flavour of RISC out, isn't there?
Well, there's RISC 5, which is an open source thing, but we won't go into
very
that
niche,
because it's quite niche. I don't think it's as niche as it is. I mean, they'd say they're not that niche, but I think it's apparently the Chinese are taking a lot of interest in RISC 5 because it's not licensed.
Yeah, well, as we've spoken about loads of times before, the Americans are forcing them to be utterly self-reliant. Anyway, carry on. I interrupted.
But ARM is the whole name, and it's a product of investment by people like Apple, I think, originally. Those guys back in the day. And the name itself stands for, I think it's Advanced RISC Machines.
I believe you're right. But now they don't write. They used to write it as an abbreviation. Now they just write ARM as in.
Yeah, I don't like
ARM.
big capital letters everywhere. I've always sort of done it as ARM for probably longer.
No, well, I won't capitalise Nvidia. Nvidia, and I notice you don't either.
No, I don't like capital letters.
Nvidia likes you to write the whole thing in capitals. Well, they can fuck off.
No, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go down that capitalisation route.
No, that's a slippery slope.
It is.
Next thing, we're handing over our souls to AI.
So ARM is like the dominant application processing unit, I think it gets called in the smartphone world, but they're the dominant force in smartphones. They're pretty much in everything. So their position in smartphones is a bit like Intel's position in sort of PCs and servers. And for a long, long time, the two of them struggled to sort of enter each other's territory. And I think that's changing. It's sort of in favour of ARM, really.
Right.
Intel's had its go at trying to get into smartphones, and I think it's pretty much given up. I mean, you'd know more about that than I would. This is your sort of area, Intel's attempts to try and get into
Yeah, well, I've spoken in previous pods about Moorestown, which was about 15, 20 years ago, which was their attempt to come up with it. And it went, cut a long story very short, it went the predictable way. It was too hot. It was too power inefficient. Yeah. It was a quixotic, doomed venture from the start, but they felt they had to give it a go for some reason.
Yeah, so their chip, x86, is very powerful, and can do lots, but it's power hungry at the same time. Be more powerful.
So it's not good for constrained environments.
And the criticism, if you're going to level one at ARM at risk, is that it's power efficient, but it doesn't quite pack the same punch.
Yeah.
And you need more cores, and then you're sort of in the same problem. So it's not been perceived to be as good an option for the data center environment. Let's say.
Incidentally, Nvidia also tried to get into SoCs, which is what we call the chips in phones, system on chips.
Right.
And they failed. I can't remember what they're called. Tegra, I think they were called.
Right.
So they tried as well, coming out from the Nvidia angle.
Oh, okay.
And they failed as well. So it's not easy.
Yeah. So as I say, this is shifting a bit. And it's shifting in ARM's favour. And there's been some evidence of this going on in the hyperscaler world, where people like AWS have actually bought ARM. They basically come out with designs. ARM. They come out with blueprints that you take and you
license them.
You buy a license, and then you take that and you build your chip on top of it, essentially. And AWS has done that, and they've come up with this chip called Graviton that they use, that's been talked about quite a lot. That's used in their data centers for some workloads, and it's a general purpose processor. It's a general purpose processor that's based on RISC rather than CISC, rather than x86. So if you look at for AWS data centers today, most of it's probably still x86, most of the sort of stuff that's considered to be a sort of general purpose CPU, but they're investing in their own Graviton chips. And they're even talking about those Graviton chips being used as an option for the radio access network. So you would have this is something that Dish would be likely to do. And as I understand it, this hasn't happened yet, but Dish putting its radio access network into a AWS data center, essentially putting the functions into an AWS data center where they're then running on a Graviton general purpose processor rather than something that's x86 based. You've got another company called Ampere Computing that's backed by Oracle that's doing work on ARM-based chips that seems to be making some advances. If you look at the Counterpoint Research is one of the companies that does stats on this, and they
founded by a former colleague of mine.
Right, and Ampere had done very well. I seem to remember in 2022. I haven't seen the figures for last year yet, but their kind of market share had gone up quite a lot. So there are these options that are emerging that are trying to build ARM-based general-purpose processors as an alternative to the x86 stuff that you get from Intel and AMD. And one of them is Nvidia. So besides doing its GPUs and all the stuff that everybody's really excited about, it's an ARM licensee. It builds general purpose processors, CPUs, based on ARM designs under this brand Grace Hopper. You might have heard. Grace Hopper was like some rear admiral or something in the US Navy, wasn't she? But she was also kind of a scientist and someone who was like you can look it up now.
A bit like that Hedy Lamarr.
She's a bit like Hedy Lamarr, but more recent, I think. Even more recent, possibly.
So she was an actress, and also she invented Wi-Fi. I know. Something. It's mad,
also looked terrific. And
She's just fucking.
I don't think
far too much going.
Grace
for
Hopper's quite up there in the kind of model looks, but anyway, she's this sort of famous woman who they've named this super chip after, called Grace Hopper. That's part of their pitch to telcos. So their attempts to get into the radio access network are very much about this Grace Hopper super chip, and the idea there is that you use the Hopper bits, the GPU, to break it down very simply, and the Grace bits, this ARM-based CPU.
Right.
And the Hopper bit would do, and this is where it starts.
So the Hopper bit is like core Nvidia competence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Hopper bit would do, and this is getting into the weeds more and more, but the radio access network functions fall into different categories. And the bit that's the most resource intensive, and that's a bit of a problem for general purpose processors anyway, it's always been the bit that's been regarded as problematic. Like you might need some custom silicon. What gets pitched as accelerators in that context is this category of functions called layer one.
Yeah.
And there are various companies that are trying to tackle that in virtual RAN. And Nvidia's pitch is about using a GPU to support those kind of functions.
Okay.
And the feedback that I've had from talking to people is that it's all a bit the jury's out basically on whether Hopper is a very suitable option for supporting layer one, because it's incredibly power hungry. And even Nvidia sort of says that the only way to kind of make the economics add up on this is to use Hopper not only for the radio access network layer one, but also to have it used for some kind of AI processing as well that might happen at the edge of the network. Yeah. So this is with them trying to basically sell their GPUs to telcos, and not necessarily to telcos, but to
I'm surprised they've got any
to companies that will
any
be
left to
deploying
sell.
it,
They're in such hot demand.
Well, yeah, that's the other issue. But the downside of these, as I say, these chips is that the economics don't really seem to work unless you are using it for both things, for AI and layer one.
Because they're expensive.
They're expensive and they're incredibly power hungry, and people are concerned about that.
So you better have a lot of jobs for them to do, otherwise it's surplus. Okay,
but where things seem to be more favourable is on Grace itself. The CPU part.
Oh, yeah.
And this is where I got some feedback from someone I can't name because it was pretty confidential, but these trials have been going on looking at different ARM-based CPUs against Intel's Xeon family, the ones that have been used very much in virtual RAN until now, and kind of assessing them against that for doing the radio access network. And the feedback after these trials that they'd done was that Nvidia, with its Grace ARM-based CPU, was like right up there at the top.
Right.
And
so that's significant in the broader x86 versus ARM thing. As we spoke about a couple of times, I mean, Richard Nomura gets a lot of shout outs, but that's because he's quite insightful and he gives his at least part of his insights away for free.
Yeah.
He flagged up that point where these new Copilot new Copilot laptops came out where Qualcomm was the chip.
This is exactly the same as that in the radio access networks. It's very much more in the weeds because people pay more attention to what the chips are in your laptops. It's easier to sort of envisage and imagine. But this is exactly the same thing. This is a threat to Intel, which has had this. And by the way, it's not a massive threat to Intel because it probably makes no money at all from virtual RAN.
Yeah.
But I think one of the reasons that virtual RAN market hasn't taken off as quickly as it could, and you've been exposed to this as well at Chatham House Rules events where people have commented on this, is that people are worried about having only one chip maker as your virtual RAN option, and they want alternatives. They don't want to invest in something where there's only one company that you're going to be dependent on. So I take this as a positive, actually, that someone's saying Nvidia is really good in this area.
Plurality and all that.
Yeah.
Okay, let me quickly, we've got like
10 minutes.
Less than 10 minutes, yeah.
Sorry, I prattled on there a lot.
No, it's fine. It's my job to butt in, but I don't want to butt in if you're saying good shit, which you normally are. I just want to make a very quick point. It's not a big story. It just lends itself to a little bit of conversation. One of the things I wrote this week was headlined, Nokia and Telia seek to exploit the new 6 gigahertz opportunity. The actual news itself wasn't a big deal. It's just one of those trials where they've managed to beam something from A to B. Whoop-de-doo. But the fucking well done. But the point is 6 gigahertz. So there was this conference at the end of last year where there was a big dispute over this big tranche of about, I think it's about 300 megahertz of spectrum, which is a big chunk of spectrum when you consider that the smallest increment of spectrum that people use to transmit phone signals is 5 megahertz. So 300 megahertz, obviously, you could do a hell of a lot of massive MIMO and all that sort of thing. And anyway, the powers that be decided that a bunch of that needs to be given to mobile as well, rather than left unlicensed for like Wi-Fi use. So the Wi-Fi people were butthurt, but there we are. Shit happens. And so that's what they were checking out. And the reason I think it's worth, albeit very brief conversation, is people were going, we need more mid-band. So this comes in the mid-band section. I mean, that perhaps the more useful end of mid-bands down more like 3.5 gigahertz or something like that. Basically, the propagation characteristics, for people who don't know at all, get worse as you get higher frequency. It basically penetrates walls less. It gets obstructed by things like trees and other stuff. Basically gets through stuff less well, whereas really low frequency just goes through everything. But the flip side is there's a lot more of it. And then we need it for massive MIMO. We basically need it for fatter pipes, more bandwidth, all that sort of thing. And so the lobbying is that the mobile industry is going, we need this 6 gigahertz stuff because we're running out, and the demand for the capacity needs keep going up and up and up. And the reason I wanted to talk about it is I just wonder whether we do need it. And it comes back to what we mentioned on a pod a couple of weeks ago. And he actually flagged up that pod, a frequent guest of ours, William Webb, who wrote a thing way back in 2016 where he actually predicted that total network data demand was going to follow an S-curve, which nearly all exponential curves eventually level off. They can't get going forever upwards, can they?
No.
Unless it's Nvidia's share price.
Yeah.
Although even that's dropped off today.
But that's growth rates, isn't it?
Yeah, well...
so I guess the S-curve...
The S-curve is total... exactly.
Yeah.
But the S-curve plots total data consumption, total data traffic, yeah?
Well, I think his S-curve is of growth rates.
Okay, well, anyway.
So the point of the growth rate is that it's been going up and up and up, and then it's now started to like come down.
But an S-curve, no, I think his S-curve describes the total amount of data used because it's been exponential, it's been growing like mad. And the S-curve, as it levels out towards the top of the S, just basically means that growth is slowing down.
Yeah.
I mean, if it was just plotting growth, then it could be more like a bell curve.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I think, and that's just what I want to say, and I'll give you, last say on it because we only got 5 minutes left. Do we need this 6 gigahertz band? Is the demand for data going to be there, or have we just reached a point where we just don't need any more spectrum? We've got enough.
I think they probably do need some of the 6 gigahertz. I mean, I like William Webb's analysis, and I think it's backed up actually by what some other people have said. Analysis Mason did a really good study on this as well. And there's somebody else. Dean Bubley was involved in a study that was on this topic. Right. So it's not just him saying it. There's actually quite a few.
Yeah.
And I think even Ofcom's recent
the data will be clear before long anyway.
Well, I think Ofcom came out with some data recently about the UK specifically. Oh, how can we not mention Omdia, our sister company? They have data that shows a slowdown that I got hold of from our friend Ronan, who's research, showing several countries. It's a weird picture, actually. The data that Ronan sent me, which I won't go into the specifics of it, but some countries it's the opposite. In Europe and some countries but the aggregate is obviously backing up William Webb's take. But there are some weird exceptions where it's kind of like gone up quite a lot. And I didn't get to the stage of sort of drilling down and saying, why has it gone up here and why has it gone down there? Maybe I should do that and do a story on it.
Yes, I would imagine, just totally guessing, that it could be a product of the maturity of the market.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, and launching like 5G at some point and having some marketing around it, and people have like enthusiastically gone. I don't know.
And also like GDP per capita, presumably in richer countries, people are subscribing to more streaming services and shit like that.
Yeah, so I get that, but I still think probably we're still going to consume more. The rate's slowing down, but we're still going to consume more for a few years. And I think.
But this clamour for more spectrum, I think, will die down.
It probably will, and I think obviously the operators would want to have all of it. They want to have as much as they. I mean, some of them don't. Some of them are Wi-Fi companies themselves, so they appreciate that. I mean, that's the big argument, isn't it? It's how this gets dished out, really.
Yeah.
Because the battle's between Wi-Fi and cellular.
And Wi-Fi seem to have lost the 6 gigahertz fight.
Well, have they? Right. Is that what the decision was? Because I've not paid as much attention to this as
it was actually written by our meter. I think I was on holiday. It's the end of last year.
Right.
But I think on the whole, the mobile industry managed to bag quite a lot of that.
Right. I mean, that to me is almost the more interesting thing is we hear about how much goes on Wi-Fi, right, in developed markets. The figure for, I think this is like the Dean Bubley study. They were saying 2/3 of traffic's on Wi-Fi.
Yeah, which has always undermined a lot of the 5G use case.
It does,
arguments.
And in a country like this one where Wi-Fi is everywhere, and I think I was saying this, that you go into a coffee shop and you go on their Wi-Fi network. You come into this building, you go on Wi-Fi. You go home, you're immediately on Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
It's Wi-Fi. My phone's on Wi-Fi most of the day. It's not probably doing much on 5. When it's on 5G, what am I doing? I'm probably walking down the road, being one of those dopey sods walking into lampposts and while I'm looking at the news or checking an email. But how much data is actually being used then anyway? It's not very much. No. Anything that's like really kind of requiring.
Basically, these days, unless you're streaming video, you're not using much data.
When you stream video, you might. I get that. So my son was doing this. He was going out to the skateboarding park in Clapham on the bus. And then coming back and uploading videos and watching YouTube videos of people skateboarding while he was on the bus. And I was thinking, how are you going through you had sort of 5 gigabytes a month or something at the time. So that's quite a lot anyway. And he was getting through it in like 10 days. And it was like in a holiday YouTube. When he'd been out every day to the skate park. And even at the skate park, him and his friends are like looking at YouTube videos of people skateboarding. And
so let me wrap it up. Just in summary, I mean, I think my feeling is things like this 6 gigahertz band, given that it's at the higher end of the mid band and thus presumably has slightly inferior propagation characteristics, I just wonder, having won that apparent victory at the end of last year, I just wonder how much of it will be used. And I just think on the whole, we might be getting past a time where there's this constant clamour for the mobile industry to get more and more and more spectrum. And there was another thing we wrote this week where I think a couple of Japanese companies are testing out terahertz spectrum, which is like really getting out there in terms of frequency. And I just wonder if there's a need. So anyway, we're going to stop now because we've got stuff to do.
Terahertz,
last one for you.
Waste of time.
Right.
That's my last comment on terahertz.
Brilliant. Well, let's just leave it at that. I agree with you. The old "you've got to be sitting on the base station" paradigm.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll stop it there. We hopefully got a guest next week. So thanks a lot for listening, and make sure you join us for that one.